In Republic Book 3, we have a spot where Socrates displays his dualism, the dualism between things of the body and things of the soul, in a very clear manner. He's talking about the training of the warrior class and how they are to be trained that the gods are just, and that there is an afterlife and it will be good, and so they should not fear death, and they should shun earthly comforts for the sake of better things, both here and in the afterlife, but with the source being in the eternal things. And at a certain point he turns to a discussion of human sexuality, and let's see, this is in Book 3, near 402b. Basically, we have Socrates discouraging much sexuality. He's not advocating celibacy, but he has the opinion that it, among other things having to do with the appetites, will pull a person down too much into the earthly things and not and away from the spiritual things. And so he's talking to Glaucon here, and he says, therefore, the right kind of love has nothing mad or licentious about it. Glaucon says, no, it hasn't. Socrates, then sexual pleasure mustn't come into it, and the lover and the boy he loves must have no share in it if they are to love and be loved in the right way. Socrates says, or Glaucon says, by God, no, Socrates, it mustn't come into it. And Socrates says, it seems then that you'll lay it down as law in the city we're establishing that if a lover can persuade a boy to let him, then he may kiss him, be with him, and touch him, as a father would a son, for the sake of what is fine and beautiful, but, turning to the other things, his association with the one he cares about must never seem to go any further than this, otherwise he will be reproached as untrained in music and poetry, and lacking in appreciation for what is fine and beautiful. And Glaucon says, that's right. And so sometimes readers are a little bit puzzled about this. In this case, it was a practice in which an older man who was usually married to a woman and had children with that woman would also take a younger man to sort of bring up, so to speak. And part of the deal was, in many cases, a sexual relationship. So these men practiced both heterosexual and homosexual behavior in different contexts. Many people have written about this. Some of them say maybe the reason why this was prevalent at the time and acceptable was because of the misogyny that also existed at the time. That doesn't quite cover it, because that misogyny has existed in many societies for a long time. But the idea would be that the young man was worthy of being sort of brought up and tutored and fostered and developed as a thinker and as a actor in society, whereas your wife or girlfriend would not be. At any rate, that's what he's talking about here. And then it's also sort of confusing for people, because I think almost the prudishness of it from our perspective, and particularly the way that Glaucon answers, no, it hasn't. By God, no, Socrates. It's weird because Socrates, of course, is arguing against the common practice of turning these relationships into sexual relationships. He says they should stay this side of the line and not go over the line, because we want to aim at what is beautiful and good. And there's a great discussion in the Symposium, which is a lot about this, the Platonic dialogue, the Symposium, where Alcibiades, who was Socrates' young man, goes into quite a complaint about Socrates more or less spurning him, or he felt like he was, but Alcibiades was deeply in love with Socrates, or at least he says so here, and wished to not only have this intellectual relationship with him, but also a physical one. But Socrates just wouldn't have it. And he describes it. I'm trying to find the place in Symposium where he does. Well, there's so much here, but let's see. So Alcibiades says, the mind begins to grow critical when the bodily eye fails, and it will be a long time before you get old. Well, that's Socrates saying that. Okay, so Socrates says that to Alcibiades. The mind begins to grow critical when the bodily eye fails, and it will be a long time before you get old. And Alcibiades says, hearing this, I said, I have told you my purpose, which is quite serious, and do you consider what you think best for me, you and me? Socrates says, that is good. At some other time, when we will consider and act as it seems best about this and about other matters. Alcibiades, whereupon I fancied that was smitten, and that the words which I had uttered like arrows had wounded him, and so without waiting to hear more, I got up and throwing my coat about him, crept under his threadbare cloak, as the time of the year was winter, and there I lay during the whole night having this wonderful monster in my arms. This again, Socrates, will not be denied by you, and not yet, notwithstanding all, he was so superior to my solicitations, so contemptuous and derisive and disdainful of my beauty, which really, as I fancied, had some attractions. I have Hear, O judges, for judges you shall be of the haughty virtue of Socrates. Nothing more happened. But in the morning when I awoke, let all the gods and goddesses be my witness, I arose as from the couch of a father or an elder brother. So there you have confirmation of the seriousness of Socrates' statement here in the Republic that such relationships should not turn sexual, and I'm sure he would say so of the best of relationships between men and women as well. The famous woman in the Symposium is Diotima, and she comes off pretty well. So there you have this notion of the Platonic relationship. If you ever heard the term Platonic relationship, you know it refers to a loving friendship, but not a sexual relationship. But it's supposedly something higher than that. If you Google it on the web, you will find that there's like endless commentary about Platonic relationships and their possible superiority to sexual or romantic relationships, although I don't equate the two, but many people do. So we have this discussion which is supposed to remind us yet again that the warrior class and anybody who's in charge, in particular the warriors and philosophers, have to be very restrained in the pursuit of any desires they have. They should have none, because their whole focus is going to be on the city. And there's nothing like sexual relationships, which are, at least for the time being, somewhat exclusive, or can be, to kind of make a person not think of the greater good. And that's the purpose of it all in the case of the story of the Republic. But in the bigger picture, it's also, again, just to remind you, this dualism that Plato promotes, which was later latched onto by Christian thinkers. And this is only one reading of Plato and one type of Christian theology, but latched on by Christian thinkers who did agree with Plato that material things, including the body, are a source of sin or a source of temptation that need to be overcome.